Can you believe they just had this thing out there without any barriers or anything? Hey, I'm Amanda and you're watching Girly Pop Go, and I wanted to show you my night that I had with race service with Josef Newgarden. This is going to be the first of two videos because there was kind of two main sections of this night, with this first sit down section that you're going to see, and then a whole separate talk afterwards where we literally did a little field trip where we went over to where the car was and Josef talked us around the car and things like that. And that was a whole great talk, and I want to give that its own separate video because that was really cool to see. So night school took place at race service, and they had all of their garages open and they had coffee and drinks and food trucks outside, but they had some of their different cars out as well. And they obviously had Newgarden's Indycar just there. We could just walk up and take photos with it. They did ask us not to touch it, but they realized later that they probably should have put stanchions or something up. And every time I see their Mercedes AMG GT3, I'm like, that's my buddy. Because for those of you who don't know, this is the car I got to do a ride along in at Velocity Invitational. If you want to hear the story of that, it's going to be linked down below.
Our objective with night school is to inspire and see what we can learn, and we've been looking for the most exceptional people that we can find and talk to about their approach to their careers, that's in the space that race service operates in. So we're in the creative space, but we also live and breathe motorsports, automotive. So tonight we're going to be deep diving into the world of racing drivers, the careers, the mindset of performance, and we'll see what we can learn from Josef. So, welcome. So, this is your life. Karting at 13. So, we know that you started go-karting at 13, and this is unusual because typically you should be starting when you're 5 or 6, right? So, I'd love to hear more about the starting point, maybe you at 12, and how things started at 13.
Well, first off, it's great to be here with everybody. Thank you for coming out. I'm a huge fan of race service. I love this culture that is kind of bred here. You know, we're going to talk a lot about that tonight, about the industry of motorsport and what works, what doesn't. You know, why do people find success? How do they find success? And I'm a big believer in what this group is doing. I mean, this is, you know, you're looking at it as just calling it night school, it's just an event you're going to, but the community that they're creating here, the connections that you meet, this is what everything in the world is built off of. It's about people, it's about the way people come together, the way they get the most out of each other, and I think race service does a really great job of that, and they do it very authentically, right? That's such an important word nowadays. Like these are car people, we're all car people, enthusiasts here, while also, you know, getting into the business side of the job, and I love that it's in that order. You know, it's not the other way around. So it's always a pleasure to be here, but absolutely, Rod. I started karting at 13. I always loved racing. My exposure to it was on TV. I didn't really have many outlets outside of watching it on TV, and went to the track a couple times with my dad. He was a big fan of motorsports as well, and would always watch with him. And you know, it didn't really matter what it was. It could be NASCAR, Formula One, IndyCar. I watched everything, and finally convinced him to go try karting when I was 13. And you know, I didn't want to do anything else after that. I played baseball, basketball from Nashville, Tennessee, so like typical suburban growing up, you know, just trying to go to school, figure out who you are as a person. I love sports, but I quickly fell in love with, when I finally got an opportunity to drive cars for the first time, I knew this is what I want to do with my life. I don't know how, I don't know what it's going to manifest into, but I've got to be a part of motorsport. It's my favorite thing in the world, and certainly wanted to be a race car driver, but even if that part didn't work out, I think I'd have to be a part of it in some way or form. So yeah, we started here and you know, learned a lot of hard lessons early, and just tried to figure out, you know, how can we navigate this industry. And I'll tell you, the most difficult thing to sum it up is, you know, it's like anything in life. It's really tough to figure out how you make a career in motorsport, and you've just always got to keep going. When one door closes, you look for that next one to open and try and find another solution.
But were you thinking about that as a 14 and 15-year-old? How to make it in the industry, etc.? Were you thinking that far ahead? Like, are you that kind of person that you have that focus?
Not at the time, to be honest with you. What I've noticed about myself, so I'm 33 now, and I've only gotten I think this is a good thing. This is probably how it should work. I've only gotten better as I've gotten older. And, you know, it's so quintessential. I look back and I say, I wish I knew what I knew now at 13. But I wish I had the drive and the ambition that I have now when I was 13. I just, you know, every year I become more focused on my goals and trying to not squander any opportunity that's in front of me. And I don't think that I was trying to squander any opportunity when I was 13, but you just don't know what you don't know. And I wasn't focused on, okay, how am I going to become a professional driver? I just thought, you know, I want to win races, and I really enjoy showing up to the track. It was really the most pure time in my life was when I was racing karts. I was doing it just because I loved the competition of racing and, you know, the tinkering of it and trying to understand how to beat the competition around you.
At what point did it become more serious, from club racing to championships, getting more regional or even national? Just talk us through that progression in go-karting.
And once I got basically to the, you know, 2 years into karting and I was 15, and you start learning a little bit more about, okay, there's a jump off point here. You know, if you seem like you have talent in a kart and you now want to transition that into a car, that's sort of the natural progression. You go, okay, well, what does that really look like? And then it starts to become a little bit more serious in your mind. There's just a switch mentality-wise where the karting felt so natural and approachable, and then trying to transition that into a car just felt very daunting to me. I remember feeling very nervous when I was a kid. Like, I know I can drive a go-kart really well, but I don't know that I can drive a race car very well, and I worry if that's going to work out.
Were you winning these go-kart races? Were you at the front?
Yeah. I mean, I never did a bunch of national level karting. It was, you know, it was too expensive, and it was very difficult travel-wise. You know, if you wanted to race in WK was very big, Stars of Karting was also a very big series, and it was just exponentially more expensive to do that than strong regional racing. So I started racing at a track called Newcastle Motorsports Park. It was in Indiana. It was kind of state-of-the-art at the time. It was like the nicest karting facility back in 2003, and had very strong regional talent. You know, they'd pull from Ohio, they'd pull from Indiana, they'd pull from, you know, Michigan, basically any part of that Midwest region. You get the best of the best from young karting. So I didn't have to go national racing, and we were very successful there. I had a couple championships each year that I raced at that track, and, you know, it just seemed like we didn't need to keep pounding around in karts. It was how do we figure out the transition, and how do we figure out, you know, racing in cars, because ultimately that's what we need to be doing. Yeah, to get to the top. That's a good one.
Well, let's talk about that transition, because it seems like that you hit a wall there, quite literally, with that transition point. So talk us through what happened at Sebring 2006, and maybe just the transition into getting into some race cars from go-karting.
This was a very pivotal moment in my career. So I finally got out of karts, and, you know, the most affordable thing at the time was Skip Barber. Like, if anybody in this room knows Skip Barber, the Skip Barber Racing School, they had a national championship, and it was like the thing to go do. If you didn't have a bunch of money and you were like, okay, how do I transition into car racing from karts? Skip Barber was the best bang for your buck. They used to run with Champ Car. They had a national series. They also had some regional series. And, you know, to put numbers behind it, if you wanted to run the national championship in Skip Barber, you know, you could probably do it for 45, 50 grand, which is a lot of money, but was significantly less than other forms of Formula car racing. So it was like, all right, maybe that's an equation we can figure out. So one of my very first races that I went to go do in Skip Barber was a much smaller regional championship race at Sebring. And in my very first race, I pancaked the wall in turn 17. So if anybody knows Sebring, turn 17 is that's a pretty tough corner. You enter like flat out on this right-handed kink, and then you got to kind of do this 180. And I just sailed it in there and went straight into the wall. First race. I was like, yeah, this was my fear. I'm like, you know, I'm coming from karts, I win in karts, no problem, but I don't know that I can drive a race car super well. And I honestly wanted to quit after that. I remember that night, it was a Saturday race, and I was having dinner with my dad, and I'm like, you know, I don't think I want to keep doing this. And it's really not the person I am today. It's fascinating when I think back to it, but I had a ton of reservation for getting back out there and doing it.
Did you have any other doubt like CDs that would come up sometimes that came to the foreground after the crash? Like, was there noise in your mind?
At that moment?
Yeah.
I mean,
or slightly before, these doubts you're talking about.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Before, definitely. I was always very nervous about that. This has been a big progression. I've learned so much in my racing career. One thing, we're probably going to get to this, but before that, I was always so nervous to wreck a race car. And, you know, I only tested a couple times, and even before this first race, I'm like, I can't wreck the car. I can't wreck the car. And that was kind of my thought process. And what happens? I literally go and, you know, smoke the wall immediately. So it kind of just manifested itself. And after that night, you know, my dad didn't push me. He was just like, look, you got to do what you want to do, but, you know, make sure you don't have any regrets when we're done here. And I put it in a really good way. He never forced me to do anything. He kind of let me make a decision. And I raced the next day, and I won the race. And it was a very pivotal moment for me, because I transitioned from having this extreme fear and anxiety for, like, I can't wreck the car, and it changed my entire attitude for how I drive a race car. And the one thing you cannot have is doubt. You know, when doubt starts to creep in about your ability, that's why you hear a lot of race car drivers are like arrogant assholes, because they kind of have to be really good. I'm dead serious. Like, if they're not a little bit arrogant, it's really hard for them to drive the limit. I mean, you don't want to be a total a-hole, but you have to step foot inside a car and believe that I am in complete control of what I'm doing right now. It's so hard to drive a thing at the absolute limit with the best of the best if you do not believe that. So there was a shift for me when I had that wreck and I got in the car the next day. From there on, it's not like I don't ever have doubts, but I was a different mindset inside the race car.
So if we that are listening to you can learn something, if you want to try and summarize a lesson that came from this moment, how would you describe that?
I think it's trying to find your inner belief system. You know, and that looks different to everybody. You know, I can't tell you what that looks like for each individual, but if I was going to encourage you to look for something, I think it's setting your values, and it's building that confidence within yourself. And that happens in a different way for everybody, but it's so important to try and find that inner confidence. With anything that you do, we should all feel confident about what we're pursuing in life, because that confidence really pulls the best out of yourself. It gives you the best chance, I think, to achieve whatever you can achieve. That's what I took from it, because if I didn't have that, I don't know how I could have kept going if I didn't build that confidence very early.
Yeah. So things progress. You go to the UK, and we know that this went quite well. So talk us through going to British Formula Ford and that progression, that stage.
Yeah, this was a really cool time in my life. So I drove Skip Barber, I drove that national championship, and then I got this incredible scholarship opportunity. It's called the Team USA Scholarship. It was kind of this organic thing that this British journalist, kind of ironic, it's a British journalist that created the USA Scholarship program. And this journalist, Jeremy Shaw, which some people in this room might know, he wanted to provide an opportunity for young American aspiring drivers to go and compete on an international stage. And so I won this scholarship award, and it took me to England to race in the British Formula Ford Festival, which is like a super famous race. This was the race that, like, Ayrton Senna or Michael Schumacher were looking to compete in that have won, and that was always like a springboard to Formula One. And I ended up going over there, won the race. I was the first American to win the British Formula Ford Festival. And
was it Brands Hatch?
It's at Brands Hatch, yeah. And it created a springboard for me to try and compete in Europe. And so I moved over there when I was 16. I probably just turned 17 when I actually touched down. And I lived there for 2 years, and I started with British Formula Ford, and it was some of the most fun I've ever had in my life. I got to travel all over the United Kingdom. I lived in Oxford in this apartment with another race car driver. And it's just like, what you think about in movies. Like, I was just a young kid by myself, living with another race car driver, knowing like a bunch of other race car drivers around us. And man, we had so much fun, and just traveling around the country by myself in a car. And, I drove for this team where literally the team was out of a barn on a farm. It was just like, you go to the Tandy household, and then they're like tending to the crops, and you go to the barn and check out the cars. Like, it was exactly what you would think out of a movie. It was so much fun, and I learned a lot. It reminded me of go-karting, but in racing form with cars.
And you were quite successful that season, right?
Super successful. We won the most races. I didn't win the championship. I ended up finishing second, but it was a great year, and it caught everybody's attention. I was definitely in the conversation of, I think I deserve to be here, and I think I can compete with the best. Is basically what it showed.
So was your mind starting to think of Formula One and this type of imagery?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, in the beginning, I said I like everything, and I really do. I dreamed of running the Indianapolis 500. I dreamed of, running any sort of race car, but Formula One was definitely first on the list. I think it's just, it's kind of the branding and the image of what Formula One is. It's branded as the pinnacle, and in so many ways it is when you look at the technology and the build of the cars, and that's, when I was a kid, that was what was captivating to me. I wanted, what's the fastest car? I want to drive that. So Formula One was very much first on my list. And I thought, let's try and do whatever we can to make it over there. And so that's, from British Formula Ford, you start looking at, to this slide, GP3, and, it's actually, I'm going to talk a lot, but I had a lot of crazy stories. So I was going to go to Formula 3 after British Formula 4. So British F3 was like the thing to go do, and that was the springboard to GP2 at the time. And so it was like, you race British Formula 3, you win that championship, probably go to GP2 and then get a ride in Formula 1. And I found an investor, like this really prominent guy that had seemed to be, tons of money. And he's like, I want to back you. I think you're the guy. And signed a deal with him. And he was like, I signed a deal with a Formula 3 team, and he was going to pay the bill. And I made a seat, the whole thing, and I showed up to the very first preseason test of the F3 season in 2010. And I'm just like sitting there, in the garage, like waiting for the check to clear. It's like I went through this whole process with this team. It was called Ford Tech Racing. Like I had my engineer, I had my seat, check never cleared. Never cleared. This guy just like fell off the face of the planet. And I'm like, it's right before the season starts. This whole off season, we're like, oh, it's going to be good, it's going to be good. And then it falls through at the last minute. And we're kind of sitting there with our hands in our lap. I didn't have any money really to do anything else. And GP3 came up as like a last minute solution. This was the first year that GP3 was started, it was 2010. And they had an issue because when GP3 started, they signed up 10 teams. Each team had to have 3 cars. And if you didn't put 3 cars in the track for a race weekend, they were penalized heavily by the FIA. They penalized them like 50 grand per car they were missing. So now they didn't have a full grid, and you had teams calling drivers to be like, hey, we got to put somebody in the seat. We'll give you a crazy deal. Just pay us a little bit of money and we'll put you in the car. And so I got this incredible deal from Carlin. We somehow scraped the money together, and I ended up running GP3 very last minute. Never been in a wing car in my life. And this was a pretty high downforce car from Formula Ford, and that's why I ended up doing that.
How did it go?
It didn't go well. Yeah, it's one of the down moments of my career. We could talk an hour about GP3, and I don't want to be here all night and bore everybody, but it was very political, Rod. Like, so political. And I don't want to make it about politics, but it was a new championship. Renault was the engine supply. Hopefully there's no affiliation with Renault here, but Renault supplied the engines, and there was massive issues from a parity standpoint with the engines. I'm talking like 10 miles per hour. Like, I don't know, some people know Robert Wickens, who's a great Canadian race car driver. Robert was in the series at the time, and I'm not kidding you, there was like cars that were 10 miles an hour off on straightaway speed. It was crazy. And it had nothing to do with the team. I drove for probably the best racing team in the United Kingdom. It was Carlin. Incredible.
They're quite well known.
Oh, they're very well known.
Very established.
Trevor Carlin, great guy, super great team, but it was out of their hands. Like, they had no control over these engines, and basically tanked our season in a lot of ways. And we had a terrible time. I think I finished 18th in the championship. I sat on one pole when it was wet. When it was wet out, I got a pole position, and I was like, I told you it's the engine, just change the engine. And they knew the problem, and we couldn't fix it, but we ended up having a pretty disastrous year, and we were already out of money before this time. We just like scraped this together last minute. So when this season ended, it was like, I thought we were done. I'm like, man, really came a far way, thought this racing thing could work out, and now I have to move back to America, and I don't think I'm going to be doing this anymore. Probably going to go to college or something is what I thought.
So was there a moment where you had to dig deep and find motivation to pick it up again and create some new opportunities? So talk us through that. it's always good to hear how people, when they're at those low points, how do they find that determination and grit to keep going?
Yeah, the motivation was always very high. I believed in what we were doing. I gotta say, I had an unfair advantage too. My dad was, just kind of a superhero in my life. I had an unfair edge over other people. If I didn't have my dad, I don't think I could have become a race car driver. I was working hard at what we were doing, but he was working just as hard, if not harder than me, to figure out solutions. I got kind of a lifeline though. Came back to the United States, got this random phone call from an Indy Lights team owner, Sam Schmidt, and he's like, we got a big sponsor, which doesn't happen in Indy Lights. He's like, we'll put you in the car for nothing. I think it was $750K to $1 million was the budget for Indy Lights at the time. Now you're getting bigger budgets here. Where the heck are you going to find $1 million? And he ran us for $100,000. The whole seat was paid for. We didn't have insurance, which in Indy Lights is a very risky proposition. You're we're running on ovals, okay? If you wreck a car, it's probably $200,000 to get a new chassis and the whole thing. So we didn't pay for insurance because we couldn't afford it. Got the seat, and I ended up winning the championship. And it was one of those great opportunities where it's in front of you, you just try and seize it. And I think everything aligned in a lot of ways too. Timing is everything, and certainly a little bit of luck in that. But I was prepared for it, and I definitely kept my faith all the way through, but it gets tested. If that opportunity hadn't come along, we were still working on, what are other solutions that we can be creating to try and do something else? Just fortunately, that door ended up being the right door.
I find sometimes when you have if you've had a period of challenge, and then you work very hard, you work through it, and then you get past it, and you have a success of some form in your career, in your pathway, there still can be this lingering sense that it all might evaporate, right? Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of alignment that happened, your talent, everything came together, the team, the championship. But going out of that season, were you feeling really confident? You knew that you had it and everything was going to progress now and the confidence level just increased? Or were you still having to work through some of the doubt? Because if you look back over a 3-year period, there was a lot of challenge that you worked through. So I'd like to know more about the mindset that you're developing at the end of that season, having won the championship. Where were you at?
Oh my gosh, my career has been a roller coaster as far as emotions. So where I was at after winning Indy Lights, first off, it was wow, this is great. I just got a contract. I got approached by the smallest team on the grid. They didn't even have an engine before the 2012 championship. So 2011, we won Indy Lights. I signed a deal with the smallest team on the grid. They didn't have an engine contract. And I was well, it doesn't matter. They're going to pay me. They're going to pay me some money. I'm going to be their race car driver. It's a massive shift. And it's a monumental achievement to go. And we were just trying to get to the top level of motorsports. And now I signed a contract with somebody, and they are going to pay me to drive their race cars. It's a really cool deal. Even though it's the smallest team on the grid, we don't even have an engine, so we might not show up. But they're still going to pay me, because they're supposed to. So I tell you that because everything's pretty good in the moment when that's happening. The off season felt great, but then the kind of reality hits. We got an engine. You're okay, it's really going to happen. We're going to show up. We're going to race in the IndyCar series, and I'm their guy, and I better do a good job, right? And I went through this really tough transition period in my first year of racing. I thought I was going to get fired every weekend. It honestly kind of reset. Talk about Sebring, where I had those doubts. I had no doubts up to IndyCar, and then IndyCar completely reset. And I'm man, if I do anything wrong, if I wreck this race car, they are going to fire me on the spot. And that's what I had in my mind every time I was on the track. And it was a really tough transition for me because it was the first time I was getting paid. I was used to paying to drive race cars. I got to find the money, and I'm paying, and it's no big deal. It's a different mindset when someone starts to pay you to do your job. And so I had to really figure out how to handle that environment. And it came back to a re-confidence thing. I had to find a new set of confidence now in a different way from what I was used to, and that was a big transition period for me. And And there was a lot of phases to that for the first 3 years. I had a terrible rookie season in IndyCar. It was really, really tough. We had no resources. I had no teammate. I had no data. It was a brand new race car. I had nothing historical to look at. It was just like, hey, figure this out. Good luck. And everything up to that point, I was always on good teams with great teammates and great data. So I would just show up and I could analyze everything and constantly have a reference point and figure it out. It was not difficult to do. First year in IndyCar was really difficult to figure out how do you make this thing go well. I was just driving the car hard. That's all I was doing. I was like, I was just driving as hard as it wants to be driven, and that should be pretty fast, right? That's basically what I was doing. And it was a hard season, and I definitely got, where I thought I was going to get fired every weekend. That started to happen. I started getting threatened where I was going to be fired eventually. And so then I just had to work through all that, and it was tough. It was like survival mode is what I felt like.
Do you think by this point you would have developed some mind management skills? Because when it comes down to the heat of competition, you have to find the flow state. You can't have doubt in your mind. You're going to go into the wall. So I imagine by this point you would have started to develop some of that skill set of mind management.
Yes, I did, and it took a little too long for me probably, and I think the process could have been eased. If I was in a different situation coming into IndyCar, I honestly think in some ways if I was with a bigger team and I had more resources, I could have found a better mental process to be there. But because I had no resources, I was sort of all over the place, and I was letting the fear take over too much early, where I felt like I was going to crash all the time, and if I did, I was going to get fired. But I eventually started focusing on very simple, very, very simple. It's just focus on what's in your control. You have to reduce the noise of what could be, because I can't control that stuff. And what's going to happen is going to happen. I can only focus on the things that are in front of me, and I keep developing my skill sets that are available to me and utilizing my resources. And the more I focused on that, the better I did at my job. And then eventually I got really good at understanding how to perform at my job and to handle the pressure. For me, it was probably the best experience of my life. I'm actually happy how difficult it was, because it set me up for when I finally got an opportunity to come to Penske. It was no big deal. It was like, you show up at Penske and you are expected to perform in all facets. Whether they put you on a stage with 1,000 people and they want you to recite the articles of incorporation of Penske, or they want you to talk about the way we're engineering the car for the Indianapolis 500, or they want you to actually go out on track and win the race. I was ready to do that, any way, shape, or form. And it was through the hardships in the beginning that I felt like I was prepared for it.
So was that about a 5-year process before you got the Penske deal, approximately?
It was, yeah. I had to kind of fight for this too. I don't think it's really hard to get a seat at Penske, and I didn't think they liked me at the time, especially the president, Tim Cindric. And Tim's, funny enough, he's my strategist. He's been my strategist since I've been on Team Penske. And I'm like, this guy hates me. He's never going to hire me. There's kind of a theme here, right? Like, I definitely had some doubts. But I fought for the opportunity. I got to know them a little bit. I started showing really well. I started winning races. And, I went through some difficulties. I had a really bad wreck in 2016 where I broke my clavicle, broke my right hand. And I remember I had just connected with Tim Cindric, the president of Penske. And we had scheduled a time for me to go to the shop and meet with him. I'm like, can you please give me an interview? I'd love to come speak with you and see if there's an opportunity in the future together. And so we scheduled that. I had this massive wreck in Texas. And as soon as I got out of this wreck, they airlifted me to the downtown hospital in Dallas. And I was like, bring me back to Indy. I was like, I want to plate my clavicle. I was like, I'm not going to miss anything. Everyone thought I was out for the season. And I went and got my clavicle plated 48 hours later? He wouldn't do it the next day, the dang doctor. I was like, just do it right now. He was like, we have to wait 48 hours. Why? Got it plated, was in a sling, and literally 24 hours after the surgery, I needed to go to Charlotte. I was like, I'm getting on a plane to go meet Tim. And I have this cast and everything on, my hand's all broken up. And he didn't think I was going to be going. He was like, how long are you out for? I was like, I'm going to be in your shop in 20 minutes, man. I'm looking forward to meeting. And I had a great meeting, and he's like, so when do you expect him to be back in the car? Probably end of the season next year? I'm like, no, I'll see you in a week. I'm going to see you in a week. I'll be in Road America. And I had to fight really hard to get back in the race car. They didn't want me to drive. I had to get in a simulator and prove that I could drive the car to Indycar. And I drove that next race. I finished 8th in Road America. It was pretty good. And then I went to the next race after that. It was at Iowa Speedway, one of our toughest short ovals, and I ended up winning it by a pretty good margin. It was one of my best races I've ever had in my career. And I think that's what solidified the opportunity with Penske. And I think it's a lot of ways how I got the job.
And we know that you won the championship your first year with them. You could look at that, everything that came before was your 10,000 hours as such, right? Because you came in, you delivered.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. I mean, I think everything, it takes dedication, it takes time and diligence. I think you have to be purposeful with everything you do in life. I've met so many people that are incredibly talented and that, just don't seem to have, whether it's, you choose the word, commitment or focus, or passion. These are a lot of things that are really important. I don't care how talented you are. If you don't put in the time and you don't show up for the opportunity, it won't just continue to happen. It's a great saying. I love this. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and I've had a lot of luck in my career. I prepare and I wait for the opportunities, and when and I look for the opportunities too. When they're not in front of me, I'm going and looking for them. I'm constantly trying to manifest something in front of me, and that stuff sounds simple to do, but I think some people, they take it for granted. I've met so many people with tons of talent, and some of it's wasted on it, and you could do so much more. And so all that stuff matters, I guess, is where I'm going with it.
So 2 championships, but the big one was eluding you. Now that we know 2023, 24, there was a certain race that has been won back to back. But before we get into that, I'd just like to know about you being a 2-time champion, but you haven't won the Indy 500, and that focus, and then what led to this run that you're on currently, back-to-back Indy 500 winner.
What's fascinating was 23 and 24, my wife's here tonight, she can attest to this, is probably mentally the most difficult years for me. And I don't know why that correlates to winning the Indy 500 the last 2 years. I can tell you the one thing that correlated in 2023. I had let go of the obsession with the race, and I found a better balance mentally in my own mind about that particular event. If you're in racing or you're in IndyCar specifically, everybody basically considers your career failure if you don't win the Indy 500. You can win the most championships, you can have the record for wins outright, but if you don't win the Indy 500, they kind of look at you like it's all for nothing. And I hated that was the formula, and that people prescribed to that. They were like, no, that's how it works. Like, you have to win the 500 to be complete. And it kind of ate me up because it's such a hard race to win. It's one race out of the year, and like everybody makes it this big deal, as it should be. It is a massive deal. But it can like consume you. You can become obsessed with it, and there's so much pressure for just that one race that I didn't have a healthy relationship with it. And by the time I got to 2023, I had to let go of it. I'm like, I may never win this race. I probably won't ever win this race, and that's okay. I got to be all right with it. And so what I started doing was I'm on the grid for the Indy 500. I've qualified to be here. Like, I've already won the race. I have already won the race. Like, it sounds a little sappy, but like, it was true. I took it in a little bit more. I wasn't so focused on like, am I winning today or am I not? It wasn't like that attitude. It was more like, look at what we're doing. Just enjoy this race. And I love oval racing. I did not grow up racing ovals, but it is so freaking fun. Like, you have no idea. Especially when you have a good car, it's really fun. So I started to just enjoy the job. I said, I get a chance to run 500 miles here. I know I can kick ass at it and just have fun doing it. Like, I'm not going to worry if I'm going to win or not today. And then we ended up winning. And then we went back to back. It was like what a crazy turn of events. It was really cool.
I would like you to describe something for me. Just rewind a little bit. the first time that you went flat out around the Brickyard. What was that like? The first time in an Indycar.
Oh, so cool. So cool. Oh my gosh, you know, I think we all like speed here. There's nothing quite like Indy. I mean, you know, even in downforce or race trim, heavy downforce, this car is like loaded up. It's actually not too bad when the car's nicely balanced. It's not too bad to stay flat because it has it by yourself, not in traffic, it's a different story. But it's pretty easy to stay flat by yourself in the corners when it's loaded up. The car's still doing 25, 230 miles per hour on the straightaway when it's loaded with heavy downforce, and it's a rush. I mean, it's a total rush. You know, you've really got to get the thing, you got to open the arc up a lot to keep scrub out of the car, and I mean, you're just like dancing. I wish oval racing could be conveyed better to people on the outside. It is like such a craft. I mean, this thing is skating half the time, especially in qualifying. That I'm telling you, the car feels like it's floating. You know, it's not like it's loaded up and you can feel it really like digging in. It doesn't feel like that. It's like shit. Like this thing is like I am floating. I think I'm floating where I'm gonna miss the wall. You know, and you're just kind of like guiding this missile. It's so cool. And I remember the first time I drove there, I'm like, this is nuts. It was so cool. But you know what's crazy about Indy? Because people ask that, it slows down. You'd be amazed what your mind can just start to process. Especially after a couple weeks. Indy, you always get a couple weeks to do practice, and like by the end of the month, it feels, I don't want to say it feels slow, but it just feels controlled at the end of the month.
Amazing. I've had the opportunity to have a media pass and stood on the outside of turn 1 during a practice session, and I stayed there maybe 10 minutes, and after a while my body told me, you should not be here. I just felt right past the wall.
You know what's psychotic? If you go to Indianapolis, so qualifying weekend, if you ever get a chance to go, there's just like this little wall divider in between the track and the pits. Man, this is like so old school dangerous. And like everybody's lined up at the end of pit lane, and there's just like a mass amount of people there. And you got a car ripping like 245 into turn 1, and you can literally like, here's the wall, and you can literally like just stand here, and then this car is like 10 feet from you, and I'm like, this is not safe. I should be here. And it's the coolest thing to do. You should definitely do it. Like, go to Indy for qualifying. It's so sick. You can stand on the inside, you can get a pass. It's wicked. It's very dangerous though. Keep your head up, you know?
Let's talk about sports cars. So, we know that you won Daytona this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I would love to hear about your first experience driving at night in a prototype at Daytona. I don't know what year that was, but if you could talk us through night racing, because that's a different discipline.
Yeah, I had the graveyard shift. So, you know, I was fourth man on the team. I gotta be honest with you, I was not a big contributor to our 24-hour win. I basically like showed up and just happened to be on the winning team. I was like, you guys did so good. Look at these watches we got. Especially Felipe. Anyone know Felipe Nazar? Awesome Brazilian guy. He like won the race for us basically. I was like, nice job, Felipe. Look at us. I'm not even joking. This is how I felt so awkward being part of the team. I think I drove 3 or 4 hours of the night while they slept. So it's so different. I don't know how to, you know, I was so single-minded when I grew up racing. In single seaters, it's all about you. You know, you're the selfish person. Like you're the nucleus of the team. Everybody is revolving around your feedback and what you want from the car. And when you get into a sports car situation, now you actually have teammates. It's not like you don't have teammates in IndyCar. It's so different. Now you're sharing with 3 or 4 other people, and you know, it's about compromise, and it's about, you know, trying to support one another. And it's not a normal thing in single-seater racing. Like, you're not looking to absolutely support one another truly. I mean, you are, but it's just different. And now you want to get the most out of each person on your team. And I just remember being a part of it and thinking, I don't know, I kind of imagine my son. I have a 2.5-year-old son, and I imagine him racing. I felt proud of like the other drivers. I was like, wow, you guys did such a good job today. And it's a unique feeling. It's a really, you don't normally, if my teammate IndyCar does a great job, of course I'm happy for the team, but you don't feel like proud of the other driver, like, way to beat me, man, great job. That's just not how it feels. And I felt real joy and happiness for the drivers around me. So it was a unique perspective change for me. Totally different style of racing. It's much more of a sprint nowadays because the cars are so robust. Like they just don't break like they used to 30 or 40 years ago. So it's kind of a flat out sprint. But it's different. It's not as mechanical as that IndyCar over there. That thing is just kind of raw and natural. The Porsche and the prototype, it's like flying a spaceship. You got a million switches on there, and you got like 6 engineers shouting commands at you all the time. This is overloaded, change it to this. And you're like, what? It's just, it was like, can I just drive the car? So it was a very different perspective change, but I will say the one thing that was awesome was driving at night. It's so cool. You've got like 60 cars on track, and you're just, especially when you're like top dog when you're in the GTB, so you're just like cutting through everybody like against you and flashing your lights. So that was really fun. It was a different perspective for sure.
Well, I would like to ask you to give your advice to us. You're a professional athlete, and you've been around a lot of successful racing drivers, many GOATs, all that stuff. And I would love to know if you can tell us some principles of what you think the most successful people that perform consistently, if there's some paradigms or some methodologies, commonalities that they have, and what are the most important ones for yourself as well in your approach?
There's a common thread that I've noticed amongst really successful racing drivers, and the number one ingredient is their awareness for what they need, them as an individual from the car. So, when you're racing cars professionally, you're constantly, of course, we have a bunch of data on the race cars that the engineers can pull. There's like 100 channels on an IndyCar that you could be pulling and looking at things. And you would think, well, okay, the engineers can just sort everything out for you, right? Because they can see it. It's not really how it works, and everybody drives a little bit different. You have to be very in tune with what you personally need. So there's a self-awareness in there. And the greats are so good at understanding what they're missing at all times. And it's what I've tried to perfect in my racing. The engineer's only as effective as your feedback to them. If you give them the correct direction, the correct, recipe for what's happening, then they can help solve the problem for you. If you don't, you can lead them down a rabbit hole, you can go the wrong way, you get lost. And that still happens to the greats, but it just doesn't happen nearly as often. They're so good at being in tune with themselves and what they need at every moment. If they're deficient in something, they can recognize it immediately and they can find a solution. Or they can at least start to dissect it and understand what is the solution to fix this. They're so good at it, and all the greats have that. The second thing I would say, which is critical, is it's like anything in life. The greats are excellent at maximizing the team around them. That looks a little different, I think, for every great, but they find a formula where they get the most out of the people around them. And that, for me, I just try and, I have certain skill sets that I think work well on the team, but I recognize these strengths with everyone around me. And, everyone has something great that they can contribute. And so let's just get everybody's strongest attributes, put them together, let's support each other, let's be positive. It's like silly stuff, but it works. Like when you're positive and you support each other and you recognize the strengths and you try and lift everybody up, you'd be amazed how much more successful you can be. When you're, if you're negative or you're unproductive or you're closed off and you don't want to be a good teammate, I just don't see it work very often. Whenever I see those environments, I always see it eventually go south. So the greats of the sport, they know how to create a winning environment around them. And that can, like I said, that can look a little different, but the winning environment is the way that you interact with the individuals around you.
I'm interested to talk to you about this. So, because I know that you have very specific goals, right? And you imagine where the trajectory of your career is going to go, and some other discussions we've had, which might be the achievement focus, right? which doesn't necessarily lead to happiness all the time. That's almost a different lever, right? And of course, a lot of people that are career focused, who are looking to have a sustainable motivation, to talk about fulfillment, that one's life has meaning, one's values is intersecting with what one's doing for a living, etc. So I'm curious how you would compare these three elements, right? Your achievements and the achievements that you want to do, your goals in your racing driver career in the future, what you imagine for yourself, and then how you approach this notion of happiness and how that fits in with fulfillment.
Well, I'm going to try and riff on this on the fly. I really have not prepared something, but this is a cool way you've constructed this, because if you look at me 12 years ago, and certainly for the first 10 or 11 years of my IndyCar career professionally, achievement was the only thing that I had in my mind. And it was the only thing that mattered to me. I have to be the greatest of the sport, or like, what was I doing? It's all for, it's everything or it's nothing. And that was my mindset. And in some ways, I still have that drive. I definitely do. I would like to be the greatest that my sport has seen. I want to do that. That's why I wake up every day. But I'm not so laser focused on that. But when I was just laser focused on that, I had like no happiness. No happiness. And with no happiness, you don't have fulfillment. They interact off each other. So now, I feel like I found a better balance where I still want to be the greatest in my sport. It's what drives me. But I don't have to achieve that. It's kind of like the Indy 500. If it doesn't work out, that's okay. And what I want to be proud of is the effort that I put in. And as long as I look back and I say, I met every opportunity with maximum effort and I tried to make the most of it, then what's going to be is going to be. I'm still going to try and achieve the best, but it can be okay. And I found fulfillment in that too, because I look at certain things in my career and I go, I want so much more, but look at how much I've done. I think you have to take enjoyment out of those. It could be anything in life too. You have to celebrate those little wins. I used to just dismiss every win. It was like, yeah, it's another win on the way to this. It's like, that's not really how it works. It's like, of course I want to be here. But like each rung you go up is important, and it is fulfillment. And I have that now. It's taken me a long time to get to that point. I promise you, it's just like the last year I'm starting to find that balance. But I look at this and say, if you want all of this, you have to have balance mentally with the way you approach and look at things. And balance can be kind of a broad word, but I do believe it applies to everything. And certainly when you look at your career, you need to have balance to have fulfillment.
I review you as a high achiever, and talking about balance, I'm curious how you break down the different areas from training, exercise, your other passions. I know you love Japan and travel, video games, and you're also doing charity work, children's books, which we'll talk about in a moment. So what can we learn about someone that is like yourself, who's very focused, who's on a trajectory, who's leading a very exceptional life? But how do you break down what you think the constituent parts of? If we were to maybe not look, say we're a month of your life, not 1 week, but a month, how do you break that down?
Well, I have a complex life. I really do. And, I'm fortunate I have so much help nowadays. I've got great people around me. Like Amy's here tonight, who's one of my great helpers. She works on my company and just does so much. My wife, Ashley's here. She does so much for me. I have other supporters that are here. Any high achiever that you meet, they do not do it alone. I don't care how impressive they are. They are dividing and they are conquering. It's never a one-man show. And I've had so much help in my life. It started with my dad and my mom. They really were pivotal in putting everything in place for me. But I guess what I would say is most important, what is the nucleus of that, is your priorities. And this is, I think, most hard for young people because there's so many distractions in the world. I didn't know we were going to be talking about this stuff, to be honest with you. But I do believe this. Young people now, it's so hard to set your priorities and not be distracted by all this candy around you. I still have social media, and I'm thankful that I have help with running it now, but I'm not really on it much. I'm not focused, and it's so easy to get trapped in that rabbit hole where you're just on, social media and you're seeing highlights of everybody all over the place, and they're just highlights. You're not seeing the real meat and potatoes of things. So priorities is always the focus. So there's all this stuff that I want to achieve in life, but my nucleus right now has been my family and my racing. It's those two things, and so everything else can be built off these priorities. If you're going towards a project, that you want to achieve in your life, then don't fill it up with 6 other things and start dividing your time. I mean, you need to stay laser focused on kind of one thing in front of you. Once you get that steady, then you can start adding to it. So I think we're trying to be very careful on the way, if you look at our portfolio right now, how do we add to things, and we're doing it carefully where we're not oversaturating. So the priorities is always the nucleus. And for me, that comes down to racing and family. Where's the racing career at? What am I doing to be fast on the racetrack? Like, I'm telling you, I have this conversation all the time with Amy. We have stuff coming across our desk. We're talking about starting a foundation. We're trying to bring in new commercial sponsors. We're trying to do this, trying to do that. There's a million things that we could be doing. And I'm like, if you look at my brand right now, it's kind of all for nothing if the racing isn't working out. Yeah, okay, I could stop racing and I could create a new brand portfolio. But the most important thing for me is on-track success. And I'm not saying that has to be for everybody, but I know that's my priority right now. So how am I supporting my team? What are we doing for next year? How are we setting up? What were our weaknesses? What do we need to work on? That is my number one focus, because I know everything else is built off of it. So you have to get your priorities straight. And I think any high achiever knows that. They know where their bread and butter is, and they know what they can build off of it, but they never forget that nucleus piece that's making everything else tick. So just think about that in your life. Whatever is the priority, make sure it stays the damn priority. Because people get lost in trying to do too much, I think. That's what I've observed. And I try to stay very focused on what is our priority at the time.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I have to think about that. Amazing.
It's kind of abstract. I don't know that I really said anything other than priority, but just reset the word.
Well, the last thing I want to talk to you about is some of the children's books in particular. I think that the charity books that you do. So you want to tell us a little bit about these programs?
Yeah, so the kids' book was more of like a fun, passion project. We've had a great time doing. We got a 2.5-year-old, and there's like no racing books out there. There's a couple more coming online now, but we were like, let's make a couple more, racing books, especially about IndyCar. Like, you can't find an IndyCar racing book anywhere. So we made this book, and the charity tie-in is we've done some charitable giving with the book too, on book sales. But we've got a foundation that we're going to be starting too. I used to just support these two charities. Serious Fun Children's Network and Wags and Walks, which is a dog rescue out of Nashville. And we held this ping pong charity event. We'd raised a bunch of money. I think the last year we did it, we raised like $270,000. Roger ended up matching. That's how we got there. It was like $130,000 and then he matched it. What a great guy. But now we've got to the point where it's like, we want to do more. And we want to be able to control a little bit where we give the money. And make sure that every dollar we bring in is effectively brought in. We're not squandering it. We're not, having a ton of expenses. I want to be super transparent. So I think the foundation is going to be really, really critical for us. And so that's what we're focused on now. And the kids' book's been kind of the fun piece of that. And, it kind of comes back to this last point. It's like, well, if you want to be a high achiever, what are you focusing on? And this stuff, we're fortunate. I'm in a time period right now where we can start building this stuff out. But, we don't try and build that stuff out before you're really able to do it. I was just having a conversation with another agent today, and they're perplexed. They're constantly perplexed by young athletes right now, where they're ready to focus on like the marketing before they've even done anything. And you're like, and they're like trying to beat their head in the sand and be like, dude, you just need to, what's your priority? Like, you need to get on the field first. And you need to like focus on the job before you start trying to tell people about what you do, because you haven't even done it yet. And I just think people get ahead of themselves, and we're just we're playing a little bit of catch up. But I think we're in a position where we can start to build this stuff out. But giving back is important to us, and I think this foundation next year is going to be a really fun challenge.
And that was the end of the first part of the night with Joseph's talk. This whole night was a lot, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And Joseph answered one of my questions at the end, but that's going to be in probably a whole other video. The sneak peek I will give you is that a 2-time Indy 500 winner told me to put my dad in a wall karting. Be sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more Girly Pop Go content. And that's it. Bye.